Shall we begin our session? Hey, Alberto, we can see you and hear you. God bless. So let's begin by taking 3 conscious breaths together. And with a deep in-breath. Shanti, shanti, shanti. I'm going to share the screen now. Okay, here we are. Second tier circle, April 26th. Can everyone see the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No Religion by our friend Buddhadasa Bikkhu. In this book, he digs into the heart of selfishness, namely attachment to I and mine, and points to the unselfish remedy. Last week, we ended on death, remember? We didn't get into it. So this week, we'll jump into death. And the interesting thing is the Christian and the Buddhist tradition have a very similar outlook. So we'll be looking at our Christian tradition and how that is similar to what we've been studying by this Buddhist monk. The basis of this study is there's 2 kinds of language, and we're going to get a little deeper into that. People language, which is what I'm talking in now as I speak to you. One kind of language is the conventional language that ordinary people speak, like us, what I call people language. People language is loaded with I and mine, and people language lives in the mind. So we're used to speaking people language. That's what seems most real to us. And here's some people language examples. This follows what we did last week. And I'm going to ask us to repeat these as we go along, just to internalize them. So here we go. I am strong. Everybody together. I am strong. We have so many I ams, don't we? I am smart. I am slender. I am stout. I am attractive. And so on. All our I ams. Here's another one. I like ice cream. Together, I like
ice cream.
I like ice cream.
I like chocolate. I like my rings. I like my friends. I like my church. We've got a lot of likes, don't we? I have a body. Together, I have a body. I have hair. I have fingernails. I have an iPad. I have a cell phone. I have a computer. I have a car. I have money in the bank. I have friends. I have a church. We have a lot of I haves. This is all people language. My body is mine. Together, My body is mine.
Mine.
Or maybe my body isn't. Maybe my body belongs to God. But we say that my body is mine. My life is mine. My house is mine. My car is mine. My computer is mine. We have a lot of minds. These are all people language. Now let's get off into Dhamma language, what he calls Dhamma language or heart language. Then there is the language which is spoken by those who understand reality, or Dhamma. Remember, Dhamma is the ultimate truth. It's sort of our natural Christ consciousness truth. Truth with a capital T. Then there is the language which is spoken by those who understand reality. We may be partly along that path to understand reality in Buddhadasa's sense. What I call Dhamma language, he says. Dhamma language lives in the heart, not in the mind. And we have lots of examples coming up to open our eyes. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Lots of examples. And we're going to start with death. Death, oh my goodness, people are dying all over the place. 50,000 people have died of coronavirus in the United States. Death. Using people language for the word death, there's no need to speak about what happens. Why talk about what happens once we're in the coffin? So in people language, there's a physical cessation of active life. That's death in people language. Using Dhamma language, however, our heart intelligence, we can experience the fact that this I is not going to be born. In our everyday people language, we got the I ams, I haves, I thinks, I do's. And when we learn to get in touch with that deeper reality, which he calls Dhamma, there is no I. In our heart intelligence and our Christ consciousness, there's no I. We just are. There's no you. It's like the little baby when he experiences the world. In the beginning, there's no I, there's no you, there's no language, it's just aliveness, aliveness. There is no I. So if we revert back to that heart intelligence, we can experience the fact that this I is not going to be born. It lives in our mind and in our everyday language, but it doesn't exist in our deepest truth. So if the I is not going to be born, thus the time remaining in life is no longer an issue. Our heart intelligence is just in the now. Time remaining in life is a mental concept, something that we can choose to worry about and put a feeling of worry or anxiety someplace. But it starts with people language, it's in the mind. And our deepest heart intelligence, we're just present like we are right now. And the time remaining in life is not an issue. Can we get a sense of that? Does everyone have a sense of it?
Yeah, I like your example of like a young child who hasn't learned the language of I, me, you, yours, and yet is in that heart intelligence of all of nature and all the interconnectedness. So it's a good analogy. Thank you, Steve.
So we're going to look.
It's like without the
Yes, Susan?
boundaries. I think,
Without the
at some point in
boundaries.
time, when we're born, we create a boundary around ourselves, a sense of I, a sense of self. And what you're saying just feels like without those boundaries.
Yes, in our minds, we feel individuated. We see the differences among ourselves. We're either happy or proud to be who we are or not.
Mm-hmm.
These are all people, language, mental constructs. But in our heart, we just are. We're going to look a lot more into this and have some fun with it as we look at our Christian tradition and how this is alive in our Christian tradition. Buddhadasa says this can be called non-birth when I doesn't get born. And he said, you may call it death if you prefer. Non-birth, no eyes. We need our eyes in our people language to communicate with each other, but in our deepest experience of life, can we not choose to let the I be born? He's going to give us some more examples of this. Life. All right, from death to life. Christians don't understand their own Bible. That's interesting. Just as Buddhists don't understand the Buddhist scriptures. Has he got our attention?
Yeah.
Yes. He's going to give us some example. Let us consider life in the Christian scriptures. And this is going to be an example of the difference between people language and Dhamma language. Matthew says that Jesus Christ surrendered his life as a ransom for many. Matthew said. Elsewhere, Jesus said, if you would enter life, keep the commandments. The first thing we might notice is Matthew is speaking about Jesus. He's telling us something about Jesus, even though he never knew Jesus, and everything he wrote was a reflection of what he heard later on. And the second statement is a quote that's attributed to Jesus himself. Here we go. These two statements show that the word life has more than one meaning in the Bible. Let's take a look at that. Matthew says that Jesus Christ surrendered his life as a ransom for many. Matthew used life in the people language sense, that Jesus allowed them to kill the life of his body, which is the ordinary meaning of life. He surrendered his life as a ransom for many. That was his physical life, wasn't it? So this is life in the people language sense. Jesus allowed them to kill his physical body, the ordinary meaning of life. Jesus said, if you would enter life, keep the commandments. Life in this passage is the same word, life, but now refers to life that can never be killed. It's a life which will never know death. Do we have any understanding of what this life is?
It's like eternity.
Say it again.
That could be considered something like eternity.
Something like eternity.
Yeah.
Here he speaks about life. Elsewhere, he speaks about the kingdom of heaven. So he could have just as easily said, if you would enter the kingdom of heaven, keep the commandments. In other words, if you would live out of what we might call, or what the Buddhists call, our Dhamma consciousness, our Christ consciousness, then you have entered life in the spiritual sense. So here's a couple of examples of how the same word is used differently in our scriptures. Questions, comments before we look at some other examples? By this, we see that even the simple word life can have two very different meanings. So let's take a look at die now. And I think we're going to see something similar here in our Christian tradition. The word die provides another example from Christian tradition. Die, in the language used by God, is not the death of bodily functions. So we see die used in what Buddhadasa calls Dhamma language in the Bible. Die, in the language used by God, is not the death of bodily functions. For example, God spoke to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, telling them not to eat the fruit of a certain tree. We know this story, don't we? For in the day that you eat of it, you shall die. He didn't mean a physical death there, did he? The scriptures don't mean a physical death. So what kind of dying is this? That's what we're going to look at. What do you think this kind of dying is?
Isn't that the original spirit?
Say it again?
The original spirit?
The origin of spirit, The day you eat of it, you shall die. How is it that we're to interpret this dying after we ate the fruit of a certain tree? He's going to tell us.
Good.
He's going to lighten us up here.
Got me. The only thing I can think of is being disconnected.
Okay, for in the day you eat of it, the day you shall die. Eventually, Adam and Eve ate that fruit, but we know they didn't die in the ordinary sense, the kind that puts people into coffins. Instead, they died in another way, in the Dhamma language sense, which is a spiritual death, more cruel than being buried in a coffin. A spiritual sense. This fate, worse than death, was the appearance of enormous sin in their minds. the fate was the appearance of enormous sin in their minds. That is, they began to think in dualistic terms. That's the sin. Good and evil, male and female, naked and clothed, husband and wife. These are dualistic terms. Now, the interesting thing is, the very nature of our language is dualistic. How can we speak without being dualistic? Because one of the purposes of our language is to distinguish between this and that. That's what we use language for. Oh, there's a male and that's a female. Look, Ma, the emperor has no clothes. Yes, we're clothed. That's good. That's evil. So that's the function of our language. Dualistic terms. Mine and yours. This is mine. You can't have it. That's yours. I don't want it. So let's step back from this a second and remember that little baby again that just came into the world. There's no mine and yours. There's just aliveness. There's no male and female. There's just the experience of energy of life. Little baby's not aware of being naked or clothed, not embarrassed to be naked. Of course, we're embarrassed later on when our mothers show us pictures to the neighbors of us when we were naked babies. Baby has no sense of that's mine and that's yours. Everything is just an experience. So that's dualistic terms. The pairs of opposites proliferated, making the pain very heavy. It's just part of every aspect of our people language. Pairs of opposites, so much so that their minds were flooded by a suffering so severe that it is impossible to describe. I think we need to make a distinction here in our dualistic thinking. Some of our dualistic thinking involves feelings and opinions. This is good, this is evil. This is mine, that's yours. And some of our dualistic thinking might be described as just independent fact-based or scientific. So, for example, scientists looking at the world distinguish between this and that, without necessarily emotion, although sometimes emotion. So that sort of distinguishing is very useful. It's the dualistic thinking that is embedded with feelings, where we get into trouble and where there's suffering. Because if this is good and that's bad, there's a suffering there. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it's up to us to notice in our thinking which of our thinking is dualistic in the sense of suffering and which is neutral. All this has been passed down through the years and inherited by everyone living in the present era. We were taught this dualistic thinking by our parents, by our brothers and sisters, if we had any, by our friends, in our schools, on the radio, on the television, all of this dualistic thinking. The consequences have been so disastrous that Christians give the name original sin to the first appearance of this dualistic thinking. That's the original sin. When the primordial couple ate from the tree of knowledge, that was the original sin. Is that right? And that's when this dualistic thinking occurred metaphysically. Original sin. Original sin first happened with that primordial couple, and then was passed on to all their descendants down to this very day. So we have this dualistic thinking, this original sin in ourselves. This is what God meant by the word death. Whenever we partake of this fruit of dualism, good and evil, this and that, mine, yours, from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, we must die right then and there. Not a physical death, but a little spiritual death. However minute that little spiritual death is, it's a death. This is the meaning of death in Christian language. Original sin, our dualistic thinking. Whenever the dualistic thoughts arise, there's bound to be suffering, which is death. Suffering. Suffering in the sense of not being at one with our original selves, being in our heads and having some feelings or emotions attached to our dualistic thoughts. It's a little dying. Death means the end of everything good, the end of happiness, the end of peace, the end of everything worthwhile. Well, he really jumps overboard into the river here, doesn't he?
He sure does. Give me a break.
I think he wants to get our attention. So our dualistic thinking, which we do all the time, he says, means the end of everything good. Oh my goodness. The end of happiness. Well, wait a minute. There's been a few times I've been happy. The end of peace. Well, I've experienced peace sometimes, but maybe not in my dualistic thinking. And the end of everything worthwhile. He takes a strong position here. Well, God bless him. How could we possibly step aside from our dualistic thinking when it's so much a part and parcel of our everyday language? And it's been the history of our experience of life for as long as I can remember. So he lays a challenge here down for us, doesn't he? He wants to get our attention, to be aware of our dualistic thinking so that we ourselves can experience noticing and transcending our dualistic thinking is going to be a greater happiness and a greater peace and a greater experience of everything in life being worthwhile. A greater experience of everything in life being worthwhile. A greater experience of everything in life being worthwhile. A greater experience of everything. You know, Alberto, your voice is a little muddied, so I'm having some difficulty hearing you clearly. Did anyone else hear clearly what was
I
said?
can't hear either.
Roberto, it looks like you have the cell phone or a phone line on and your computer. You're on here twice and there's an echo. That's what seems to be the issue.
One is muted, Sam, and the other isn't. May we go on, Alberto? Okay, I'm going to go on. This is the meaning of death in Dhamma language. It's called death because it makes the heart heavy. So this is the kind of death it is, not a physical death, but it makes the heart just a tad heavy. And he states that most of us die this way many times each day. So whenever we indulge in what he calls the original sin, dualistic thinking, this is mine, that's yours, this is good, that's bad. I watched the television the other day, oh, that was bad. Well, that was good. He was good. He was bad. He told the truth. He avoided the truth. All that dualistic thinking. I think sometimes it helps, at least this is what I do, when I have these experiences of making my heart a little bit heavy because I'm in some dualistic judgments and evaluations. Makes the heart just a tad that I will sometimes say to myself the following statement, which I learned from the Tao Te Ching. Can you cleanse your inner vision until you see nothing but the light? I'll remind myself of that. Can you cleanse your inner vision until you see nothing but the light? I'll address this to myself. And know that my inner vision, which is where Dhamma language resides, is only full of light. And it's my mind, all that people language, I, mine, good, bad, which is where the shade lies, the cloudiness lies. That prevents me from experiencing the light. And you cleanse your inner vision until you see nothing but the light. There's only light in the inner vision. It's the mind and a dualistic thinking that clouds that inner vision. So we can die this way many times each day. Well, he goes on. It always creates a feeling of frustration and depression to some degree, not to mention worry, restlessness, and anxiety. When we fall into our pattern of dualistic thinking, I don't like this, I like this. My goodness, they're wrong, they're right. I think the whole country is feeling a little bit frustrated these days, and some people are depressed and worried and perhaps restless and anxious because of everything we're hearing about COVID-19. All the recommendations, what to do, what not to do, and what we're not hearing that we so long to hear, which is how to prevent this illness from reaching ourselves. Are we doing enough so that we won't catch this illness? You read in the news that so many people in New York City, for example, have caught this disease, and so many people have died. And part of us has to realize, well, golly, these were just ordinary people having ordinary lives and getting together in ordinary ways, maybe even practicing some social distancing, and somehow they got it. The news also said they're now estimating that of all the people that have the coronavirus, 40% of them have no symptoms whatsoever, almost half. This means that people you come into contact with may look perfectly healthy and yet may be carriers of this disease. And then perhaps we worry that we might get it. So we're anxious to a certain extent. And it's this dualistic thinking, well, they may have it and they may not have it, that is protecting us in this sense, isn't it? Protecting us. So we try and get to the place where we use dualistic thinking to identify facts and remove ourselves from the dualistic thinking that is full of feelings. Well, that's bad, they're good. So it's a complex subject, isn't it? It's not like we're just in some neutral place and all we have to do is be conscious of our eyes and minds, and then we'll be happier, not so depressed or worried. Complex. Let's go on. The more intelligent and clever a person is, well, that's us, I suppose, the more often one dies, he says, and the more profound the deaths. The more intelligent we are with our judgments and evaluations, the more clever we are of seeing what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad, the more often we die in this metaphorical sense, and the more profound the deaths, the more it affects a sensitive, clever person. The clever person's deaths are much more special and creative than those of an ignorant person. More special and creative. We must know how to avoid this spiritual death in order to be in accord with the teachings of Buddha and Jesus. So how to avoid the spiritual death, to be in accord with Buddha and Jesus, along with the other prophets. The objective of Buddhism is the same as of Christianity. Don't let this original sin overpower you. It's there, you experience it, our dualistic thinking, but don't let it overpower you. Don't let dualistic attachments, which are our thoughts, dominate your heart or your mind. So we're watching the television, we're having our judgments. Can we step back from our own minds and thus understand everything? And not let the natural dualistic attachments and thoughts, our attachment to our thoughts, dominate our heart or our mind. Can we learn to step back from our own minds and thus understand everything from a deeper Dhamma sense? Refuse to let it dominate the mind ever again, we must always be aware of the true nature of Dhamma, that in reality, there is no duality of any sort. So here's something for your mind to chew on. The true nature of truth, life, what that little baby experiences, that in reality, there is no duality of any sort. It's something that shows up in our mind and our thinking. But it's not real. There's no gain, no loss. Remember that little baby? No gain, no loss. No happiness, no suffering. Yes, the little baby smiles sometimes, and sometimes it cries. But his smiling is just smiling. It's not really happiness, which is an attitude about what's going on. It's just smiling. No suffering. It's just crying. Whenever the source of his crying goes away, he stops suffering. Stops crying. No gain, no loss, no happiness, no suffering, no good, no evil. It's like in our scriptures when we read that the good Lord made the apple tree to drop apples for both the good and the bad. Let them all eat from Mother Earth. No merit, no sin. There's no male, no female. Those are distinctions we see in our mind. Well, of course, they're useful distinctions because especially at a certain point in life, early on in our life, it's important to know who the males and females are because we have some primordial urges to express ourselves. No male, no female. No I, no mine. No I, no mine. Yeah, no I, no mine. No, this is mine, that's yours. I did this, you did that. Another instance where we need to learn the habit of stepping back from our own mind and thus understanding all things. There is absolutely nothing at all that can be separated and polarized into opposites. Absolutely nothing. When we look at things from our deepest truth, rather than buy into them, we ought to transcend. Rather than buy into them, we ought to transcend. That's probably enough to chew on today, isn't it?
Pardon? Say that again.
I said I've probably covered enough for one day's lessons.
A lot to think about.
It is a lot to think about.
I'm going to keep going back to this. Okay, there's no good and there's no evil. But there's original sin. This original sin thing has always been a mystery. I just can't buy into original sin as it has been put out there or as I hear it. I don't know how to hear it.
What I've heard, go ahead, Jan.
This is the first I've heard of it since Catholic teachings, and it was because of Adam and Eve that we were all born with the original sin. Therefore, if you weren't baptized before you died, you went to limbo. You would not go to heaven because you had an original sin. That's what was taught in catechism.
Yeah.
Yes, and that was my understanding of original sin. We're all born bad. However, if we follow some of the precepts of our religion, we can mollify the fact that we're all born bad and we're not going to have bad consequences. Therefore, do what religion tells you to do, and you won't suffer the consequences of your original sin. But if you fall out with what we're telling you to do, then you're back into your original sin. You're bad. Goodbye.
Yeah, sort of self-serving.
I sort of gave it up until my daughter's, she married someone from Persia, and then they didn't have their children baptized. So I had to go through that in my head again and say, no, this doesn't really matter. But that all came flooding back. They needed to be baptized.
So here's another way to look at original sin. All original sin is, it's the primordial human beings learning the language of dualism and internalizing it so that I, you, good, bad, and so on becomes our source of decision making. So these teachings say, can we step back from that thing that we Christians call original sin and look at it as just the origination of dualistic thinking, and take a step back from it and not let it run us anymore, but notice it's just an aspect of who we are. It's associated with our language, our people language. It's another way to hold it if we choose.
You know, I appreciate Reverend Russ when he uses the acronym SIN, S-I-N, for self-induced nonsense.
Mm-hmm. I like that too.
Yeah.
So the original sin is the original self-induced nonsense.
The dualistic language of I, mine, yours, his, hers. I like the unity concept of we're all in it together and we'll get through it together.
I don't think any of us, including me, gets all these teachings in one fell swoop.
Yeah.
However, hopefully by presenting other alternatives for us to internalize, we can choose what works for us. Now, how do we know when things are working or not? If new ways of holding things make us feel lighter, feel lighter, not so heavy, then why not go for it? Just
Yep.
a little bit makes us feel just a little bit lighter. Well, let's just go for that little bit and we'll get to the rest of it later. Because if something makes you feel a little lighter and not quite as heavy, to that extent, you are enlightened.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So let us enlighten ourselves today just a little bit.
Thank you, Steve.
Yes.
I think we need to close because we're going to do the service. It's about time. Any final comments before we ohm ourselves out?
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Let's take 3 conscious breaths together. And with a deep in-breath. Shanti, shanti, shanti. I think we've done it, folks.
Thank you.
So let's say
Have a
goodbye.
good day, everybody.
Yeah, have
Bye-bye.
a good week.
Have
Yes.
a beautiful day.
Mhm.
Everybody.
Stay
Bye-bye
safe.
now.
Thank you.